Hello, this is the second video in the series which I'm calling In and Around Shakespeare's Language. The idea is that each video starts off with something to do with Shakespeare's language, usually with an interesting word or phrase that he uses. This leads to wider discussion about some general aspect of language or about English as it's used today. The topic of this second video is the death of words. And the word which we start with is one that Shakespeare probably invented himself, the word discandy. I hope you enjoy it. In Act 4 of Antony and Cleopatra, things are going badly for the hero in his war against Caesar, and friends are deserting him. Here's what he says. The hearts that spanielled me at heels, to whom I gave their wishes, do discandy, melt their sweets on blossoming Caesar. The noun candy meant more or less what it does today. It was an old word in Shakespeare's time. The first Oxford English Dictionary mention is 1475. But the verb discandy was new, apparently the poet's own invention. It means to melt or dissolve, by reversing the caramelizing process by which candy is made. The Oxford English Dictionary only has one further example of the word, and it's also from Antony and Cleopatra. This time, Shakespeare forms a noun out of it, and talks of the discandying of this pelleted storm. The word pelleted, incidentally, shows more of Shakespeare's inventive spirit. Although the word was used by others before, his meaning of consisting of pellets of hail seems to have been new. The word neologism is used to describe an invented word. Just how many neologisms Shakespeare was responsible for has been the subject of much scholarly debate over time, but there is no doubt that he was something of a serial neologist. There is a dictionary known as the Chronological English Dictionary, which lists new words year by year, and there are some 250 words for the year 1603. 43 of these are from just one play, Hamlet. That dictionary also clearly shows that word coinage was very much in the spirit of the age. For the period in which Shakespeare was writing, it lists no fewer than 7,968 new words. Shakespeare's discandy illustrates one fruitful method of creating neologisms. You add a prefix, in this case dis, to an already existing word. Another well-known example of the same process is the neologism unsex, which Shakespeare puts into the mouth of Lady Macbeth. "Come, you spirits," she exhorts, "unsex me here." So adding a prefix is one of a number of places that new words come from. But where do they go to? Many are still with us. There is barefaced from A Midsummer Night's Dream, frugal from The Merry Wives of Windsor, dwindle from Henry IV Part 1. All may be Shakespearean neologisms, but they are all still with us today. But a good number, it may be as many as a third, do not make it. They appear and then they disappear. They are what are sometimes called stillborn neologisms. In fact, all kinds of words, not just neologisms, are always disappearing. one 20th century scholar, John Algeo, did a study based on lists of new words which the Britannica Book of the Year prepared annually. He concentrated on the new words listed for the years 1944 to 1976. There were 3,565. He looked them all up in late 1980 editions of two authoritative dictionaries in general use, and found that 58% of the words were no longer in use. Dictionary writers must constantly be on the lookout, not just for the birth of new words, but for deaths also. In 2011, the Collins Dictionary team revealed that they had a little list of words which had fallen out of use to the extent that they were going to be dropped from their dictionary. The list included char-à-banc, a word coming from the French char à banc, a benched carriage in which the seats all looked forward rather than facing each other as in older carriages. This word first emerged in the 19th century, but there were others on Collins's list that were around in Shakespeare's time. Supererogate, for example. It means to do more than is required, and it first appeared in about 1573. Then there's whittle, used to describe a man who tolerates his wife's adultery. Shakespeare himself uses this one. In The Merry Wives of Windsor, Ford is contemplating the names he might be called once his wife's supposed adultery becomes common knowledge. Whittle is one of them. And in the same play, Falstaff describes Ford as a jealous, wittly knave, an adjective which Shakespeare may have been the first to use. There's even a pun based round the word in Love's Labour's Lost. Wit, old men, and cuckolds are in the conversation, and the page boy moth comes up with the word wit old, which combines the three ideas. Yes, but why do words disappear? There may be many reasons. Some are nonce words, meaning that they were invented for a particular occasion. Nonce comes from a Middle English expression meaning for then once. The N went from the back of then to the front of once. Here's an example of a nonce word. In Love's Labour's Lost, that same page boy moth tries to catch the attention of the ladies by talking about their sunbeamed eyes. The ladies pay no attention to him. Another character, Boyer, draws attention to a common Shakespeare pun playing on sun, S-U-N, and son, S-O-N. Boyer then suggests that moth would do better to describe the lady's eyes as daughter-beamed. There would be no expectation that this invention would last. The same is perhaps true of the word unprovoke, which the porter in Macbeth uses when he's describing the effects of alcohol on sex. It provokes and unprovokes, he says. It provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. The new word unprovoke is invented just to create an opposite for provoke. John Algeo notes that, to quote, invention, discovery, exploration, war, commerce, and revolution all breed neology. Novelty and change bring about new words, of course, but they can also kill words off. It's not surprising that medieval armour terms like vambrace, rerebrace, crinet and petrol should have disappeared, since medieval armour has disappeared too. A further example occurs in Henry IV Part 1, where the word footland rakers is used. This is another apparent Shakespeare neologism, and it describes highwaymen who work on foot rather than on horseback. They do not exist today, which is presumably a reason why the word is no longer with us. The word footpad describes the same person, and this word too is just as obsolete as the man himself. Could obsolescence be why the word char-a-banc is no longer used, because it refers to a vehicle that is no longer in use? There are problems with this explanation. After all, we still use the word coach, even though the horse-drawn carriage it originally referred to has disappeared. That word has managed to survive the transition from horse to motor. It's certainly not always the case that when an object disappears, the word goes with it. Another vehicular example is dashboard. It began life referring to a board that kept mud from being sprayed into the inside of a carriage from the horse's hooves. The horses disappeared, but the dashboard remains with a rather different meaning. Yet another transport-related example of how words defy obsolescence occurs when an internet mail order company emails you to say your order has shipped. Your order is on its way, but not, almost certainly, by ship. Another reason for the disappearance of a word is that there is a close synonym already in existence. Synonym death, as it is sometimes called, doubtless plays a role in the disappearance of some of Shakespeare's apparent neologisms. His sortants, meaning agreement, perhaps did not catch on because agreement already existed. Similarly, perhaps the verb congrete did not make it because greet was already there. Of course, poets welcome synonyms, especially those with differing numbers of syllables, which can hence be used in different rhyming contexts. The word blast, for example, already existed when Shakespeare apparently invented the noun blastment, which Laertes uses in Hamlet, in the line, "Contagious blastments are most imminent." But read the line replacing blastments with blasts, and the change plays havoc with the rhythm. The same reason may explain why Shakespeare apparently coined vasty, when the synonym vast was already available to him. The opening chorus of Henry V talks of the vasty fields of France. Perfect iambic regularity, di-dum, 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 which they would not have been if the word vast had been used. Some words disappear because they are not user-friendly. Transparency is particularly important for word survival. There are new words or usages which have an immediately clear meaning, even though you may not have heard them before. Recent words like brunch and gastropub are like this. Some of Shakespeare's neologisms are transparent in the same way, such as the verb untent, the noun pauser, and the adjective offenceful. Though notice that, ironically, none of these neologisms makes it either. But others of his inventions are more opaque, less easy to work out, like fascinorous, intrinse, and probal. User-friendliness can also include length, as well as how much a word sounds like English. The word radiogram, Röntgenogram, and X-ray, all meaning the same thing, are good examples. In the 1920s, radiogram was by far the most popular term, but was soon replaced by Röntgenogram after the German physicist Wilhelm Röntgen, who discovered the X-ray in 1895. This word's heyday extended from the 1940s to the early 1960s. But by 1960, both of these long, foreign-sounding words had largely disappeared, replaced by the much more user-friendly X-ray. But the life and death of words is not nearly always a question of obsolescence, availability of synonyms, or user-friendliness. It's often to do with power and status. At various points in the history of English, different languages have carried particular status, and these invariably leave their mark on the vocabulary. After the Norman Conquest, French was the language of power. Many French words supplemented the existing Anglo-Saxon vocabulary. But there were many words which supplanted rather than supplemented. So the Anglo-Saxon stow lost out to the French-derived place. Now we just use stow in place names like Chepstow, and as a verb meaning to place in a receptacle. Similarly, the Anglo-Saxon woord, associated with our word weird, was replaced by fortune. In Renaissance times, the language of status was Latin, while today the dominance of America is being felt on British English vocabulary. Though the words post and envisage are still in common usage, the terms mail and envision, favoured by American English, though they may have been British in origin, are certainly gaining ground and may eventually dominate. Do words always die naturally, or can they be killed off? History is full of attempts at what C.S. Lewis calls verbicide. Since the 17th century, the French Academy has seen as part of its role to watch over the French language. In recent years, it has been much exercised by an influx of English words. It has tried hard to ensure that words like Walkman, software, and email die before they are even born, proposing French equivalents, in these cases baladeur, logicien, and courrier. English has not been without similar attempts, and indeed, in Shakespeare's own time, people argued passionately about whether or not foreign words should be allowed in the language. How successful can such attempts be? In general, it's usage rather than decree that gives the thumbs up or thumbs down to words. It's certainly a jungle out there, a true battle for the survival of the fittest. Darwin himself says as much. In Chapter 3 of The Descent of Man, he argues that, to quote, "Single words, like whole languages, gradually become extinct. The survival or preservation of certain favoured words in the struggle for existence is natural selection," he says. It's a struggle which Charabang seems to have lost and Shipped has won. You can sometimes see the battle lines forming with Shakespeare's neologisms. For example, he may have been the first to use the synonyms dismask in Love's Labour's Lost and unmask in Hamlet. We now know that the latter won the struggle for existence and the former lost. We can only guess why. The present day is very rich in new words. How many of them, one wonders, will last? The website Thoughtcast discusses several interesting internet-related neologisms. There is griefer, for example, used to describe someone who joins an internet game for the purpose of causing harm by disrupting the activity in some way. Then there's Google cooking, which means looking at what ingredients you have in the house, then using Google to find a recipe that uses them. Will the terms catch on? One that has become so ubiquitous already that it may well last is wiki, occurring in the word Wikipedia. Wiki is a Hawaiian word meaning quick, and there's a transit bus in Hawaii from Honolulu Airport to town centre called the Wiki Wiki bus. Another word that has caught on is spam, used to describe unsolicited email messages. It's a luncheon meat which was very common in Britain in the post-war years. Its email-related use is based on the Monty Python sketch in which every dish on a restaurant menu contains spam. You can find the sketch on YouTube. Spam seems here to stay, but what about the word ham, now sometimes heard in Britain to describe real, bona fide, non-spam email? Then there are text language inventions like lol, which are gradually moving into speech. And what about the use of the verbs ask and spend as nouns? It's true that this practice irritates some people, but in some contexts they seem just the right words. For example, some British credit card-operated petrol pumps nowadays display the message maximum spend £99. What word could have been used here if spend had not become a noun? Alternatives like expenditure or outlay do not seem quite right. Those who are not irritated might well ask how we have managed without these usages for so long. There may similarly be some of Shakespeare's stillborn neologisms that one is sorry did not make it. His use, for example, of the word exceptless in the sense of without exception. Timon of Athens talks about his exceptless rashness. And King Lear speaks of the fleshment of this deed. Today we would say, possibly less elegantly, something like the first flush to capture the same idea. Then there's the word under-honest, which Agamemnon invents to describe Achilles in Troilus and Cressida. We think him overproud and under-honest, Agamemnon says. It's a nonce word, using under to balance with over. But how well it captures that characteristic associated with a phrase that was the neologistic invention of the political thinker Edmund Burke, economical with the truth.